to me, it's an accelerator from a tech, product building perspective. I can't imagine anybody coming into this industry today building product and not, leveraging the MISMO standard.
Welcome to Actualizing Success. In this podcast series, our in-house advisors discuss today's finance and technology topics with an emphasis on solutions that embrace tomorrow.
On today's podcast, we're going to talk about MISMO, specifically about adoption challenges, on why it's so tricky sometimes for companies to adopt the standards. And we're going to talk about how some newer, more modern technologies can reduce friction in that. And so today we've got a good group. We're joined today by Geran Combs. Geran's managing director at Actualize, and he's in charge of all of our technology, but more specifically, all of the MISMO services, as well as our TransformX product. And also Brian Vieaux from MISMO. I think we chatted last time, Brian. It's going on a year in terms of your presidency there, and a lot of really good stuff's been going on. But I thought maybe if you could just introduce yourself a little bit, talk about your background and how you ended up at MISMO, and then we'll go ahead and start diving into the challenges. Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me on, Geran. Great to see you. First of all, I want to thank Actualize. I had very little appreciation for firms like yourself and the important role y'all play, not just, from a MISMO perspective, but from an industry perspective and connecting the dots. And in my 10 months now, or getting on 10 months, as you said, in this role at MISMO, I've spent a lot of time learning about folks like yourselves and your teammates. And man, there's a lot that goes in, and there's a lot that I think the average lender doesn't really understand, or just assumes, or takes for granted. And I'm excited to get into that, because I think that's really the heart of some of the adoption challenges. So a big thank you to you guys before I get rolling here. So 10 months ago, I joined MISMO as president. I'm a career mortgage banker. I was in the origination production side of the business for the better part of 3 decades, mostly with large financial institutions. And a big focus for me in that time was running TPO, third-party origination channels, both wholesale and correspondent. That led to an exit from production and entrance into the quote-unquote vendor fintech space, where I spent 6 years with a company called FinLocker, helping bring innovation to the industry around consumer education, consumer preparation, and mortgage readiness. That was a big lift, and had its own adoption challenges, as you can imagine, probably for another podcast. And then, probably in spring of 2025, started having conversations with folks about this MISMO opportunity. And I've said this a few times, but my first reaction was, no, not for me. I'm not that's way outside of my, skill set, comfort zone. I'm not a DC trade association or even a data standards guy. And as I kept having conversations with folks, from the board to some of the executives at MBA, it became a little more clear to me that somebody like myself, with the background I had in specifically with what I had to do to grow the brand of FinLocker, it actually made sense that this role needed somebody like myself. MISMO's been around for 26 years now, and as you guys well know, you've been kind of near and dear to it for most of those decades. I know, and it dawned on me that it was the best kept secret in a lot of corners of our industry, and needed someone to come in and kind of elevate the brand, tell more of the industry about the great work that gets done, and uncover opportunities to drive and expand adoption. And as my mindset kind of got around that idea that I actually had a skill set that would be useful here, I got really excited about coming in. And then once I hit the ground and got in here and really understood the depth and breadth of the impact MISMO has, oftentimes silent impact, I got more energized and really excited about spreading the word. And I think we're off to a good start. 10 months in, I think we've raised awareness to a degree. We still have a lot of work to do, but to me, the big heavy lift is still driving, scaled adoption.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, having been around a long time, as you noted, I've seen a lot of changes over the years. I'll be very upfront and say that things are very different since you got on board and in charge in a positive way. I think some folks that are really diehard MISMO people might say, well, Brian, doesn't wear a propeller hat and doesn't know XML and all that. But I will say that, just the sheer number of new members that have come on board in your tenure is impressive. And not only that, though, I think more important is more of a shift towards what I would consider to be the business value of MISMO. I think folks realized along the way that the XML was a way for companies to interoperate and so forth, and largely driven by the GSEs and the govies, but just a really, really different view and fresh air, really, I think. And I'd say, with the folks that you've brought in terms of members and folks that are new to the board, I still think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of work to do on the adoption side. And so, as an outsider looking in and taking over, just curious if you could talk a little bit about what you see specifically in terms of the adoption challenges, and then we'll pivot a little bit after your comments to more about, and then what might we think about doing about it. So Brian, you want to just jump back in on that?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think when I think about adoption of, MISMO standards, and it's broad, right? I think over, it's 26 years, I've seen and heard, that somewhere in the magnitude of 100 data specifications that have been created and managed over time. Some adopted at significant scale because of mandate, others very narrow adoption. And my background in correspondent lending in particular, I had a really a great seat into seeing companies of all different sizes and shapes and models and how they operate from a lender perspective, right? And this won't surprise you guys for sure, and definitely not your audience. Most of the mortgage companies, and I'll separate IMBs from the depositories for a moment, but most of the IMBs, when you get below the top 25, they really just rely on their tech stack, their vendors, for what I would call adoption of MISMO standards, and haven't really had a focus internally around the MISMO standards. And really, when I look at like what some of the top companies do, I'll say PennyMac because they've been very public about this. PennyMac has been hyper focused on their own data model, right? And leveraging to the degree possible MISMO as a foundation for that. And we've seen other large companies do the same. And it got me thinking, especially where we are today with technology and certainly with AI, there's really not a company of any size that can't have their own mature data strategy. But you got to start somewhere, and you got to, and I think if you start from a foundation that is MISMO, and if you just started from the simple data dictionary or the business glossary, right, with 8,000 plus defined business terms for our industry. If you just started there and built your foundation on that, how much further ahead would you be? And would it really set you up as a small to mid-sized lender for better leveraging and optimizing AI, as an example? So, I don't know that, a $500 million a year IMB is going to get too excited about all of the data specs, but they ought to be focusing on, at a minimum, that business glossary and really, building a foundation for their own data strategy. And I think that's an area that I think with what you guys are doing for sure is opening up more opportunities for lenders of all sizes to think differently about MISMO, but really think differently about how they leverage this work that's been done by the industry for the industry. And in a lot of ways, a lot of these lenders are part of the economics of funding it.
Yeah, Brian, I think those are important points. And I think a lot of the audience that listens to our podcast has some awareness of what Actualize does in terms of MISMO. But just as a reminder, we are a life of loan business and tech transformation play in the management consulting arena. And we've been doing it for a really long time. And often you'd mentioned lenders. It's true with servicers, investors, and the whole ecosystem. The challenge that they face oftentimes is really understanding how they can leverage technology, they can leverage standards in terms of their business process, their data, whatever it might be, to reduce the cost of origination, servicing, and so forth, but also strategically to be flexible when the market moves or something like that. And so again, we're one of the handful of certified MISMO consultants. And what does that mean? It means that MISMO has basically checked the box and said that Actualize is a company that you should use in terms of what you need from a management consulting. And it's not just MISMO work, which Geran will talk about in just a moment, but it's really anything that there would be in the management consulting arena. And again, I think that certification for us means an awful lot. And speaking at the last summit, we had a panel about that, and I think there was a lot to learn from the audience in terms of that. Meanwhile, we've also have a certificate to certify other technologies as MISMO certified, as well as some other things that we do in the certification space now, as well as some things that are going to be announced, I think, as early as the next summit. But with that said, we do a lot with MISMO and MISMO techniques and tools and stuff like that. Geran, I'd mentioned Geran's in charge of all of that for us, and has been involved in MISMO in not just a superficial way, in a very detailed way for a long time. But Geran, maybe you could just talk a little bit about some of the things that we do that are related to MISMO that can help facilitate adoption to the standard, reduce some friction, and perhaps even, make a couple of examples in how you describe it. And then once you do that, I'll talk a little bit about our tool, and then you can talk about what's next with our TransformX tool.
Sure. Hey everyone, Geran Combs here. As Matt mentioned, I'm Managing Director of Actualize Consulting. I've been here for 13 years. I've been a member and part of MISMO for 13 years. And over that time frame, I've chaired, I think it's up to 6 work groups. I'm also on the Res Standards Governance Board. So we're the phase gates in and out of the model for all change. So that's pretty good. What we do for Actualize, as Matt mentioned, we do business and tech transformation, but all business and tech transformation evolves around data. So, and the most famous words in the mortgage data industry is, well, we've always done it this way. So
Hmm.
everybody's data is always somewhere in 5 or 6 different locations, do mergers and acquisitions. And what we do is we help when we talk about MISMO adoption, we look at it in 2 different ways. You're either a producer of MISMO or you're a consumer of MISMO, or you're both. So if you're a producer and you need to produce an output in a MISMO type format, we come in, we review your environment, we find out where all your data is, and then we either help you map and create these specifications, we validate, we test, we go through the whole process with you to make sure you can produce a MISMO compliant file, which may or may not include our software. If you're a consumer of this, it's a little bit different because adoption takes 2 phases. One of them is an internal adoption, one of them is an external adoption. Anytime you're going to move to a MISMO-based environment, you need to inform everybody inside your environment what's going on, how it's going to work. You have to review the data. You have to go through all the data flows from start to finish, make sure everything is good that way. And while you're doing that, we're working outwardly to create the specification, to publish the specification, and then work with all the customers of that consumer to make sure that file gets produced in a proper format. So we sort of look at it on both ways. On the front end, it's the creation of the file. On the back end, it's the acceptance of the file and making sure everything's good there. And MISMO is that language that's used, so we just help people be able to produce and consume MISMO. We said it includes the file validation of the XML, the JSON, or whatever format it's going to be. It also gets into the business rules and everything else. At the end of the day, we make sure that you are creating a properly formed MISMO file, and it's going to pass and it's going to be accepted by whoever's creating it. From a example point of view, I mean, we've been doing this as long as I've been here. We've helped the largest players in the industry from an internal and external adoption point of view, from creation of the spec through to creation of the test environments, to helping their consumers who don't know what XML is, to from a very experienced to never heard of XML to they're really skilled, they've been working in it for years. So it's a wide variety of customer base, but from doing that, we've seen the struggles. We've seen where people have the most issues when it comes to creation of a MISMO file. And from that, we took all that knowledge and all that, and we created our software, which is called TransformX.
So Matt, you mentioned I'm not a propeller head, don't work in XML, haven't worked in XML. This is the beauty of MISMO. I don't have to be that person because of folks like Geran and the team at Actualize and other, the other cross section of experts from the industry that come together to do the work on behalf of industry. That to me is one of the most rewarding parts of MISMO.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Geran, you didn't lay it all out, but we've not only have we been in charge of some of these work groups, we've been the key authors of a lot of the standard creation. Not that we're the only ones, but we clearly have been involved in a lot of it. And I'll just go back to the 2015-16 time period. Folks may not remember all of the things, but they sure are going to remember TRID. and we were at the time heavily involved in a lot of different things regulatory wise. We have great expertise in the new TRID, but also, in the forms and the data. And we had a couple of clients that, again, people may not remember, but Freddie Fannie had a date by which you had to start using the UCD file, which is an XML file with the embedded PDF of the closing disclosure document. We had that all figured out really well and created a bunch of test tools and other things that could leverage our expertise and the MISMO standard to test the forms, to create the forms. And so one of the biggest name companies in the lending space at the time had us build TransformX in a custom manner for them. That was how it really all started. And what TransformX is it's simply a tool that leverages MISMO, the standards, as the canonical model. And again, it goes from the very beginning of 3.0 to current. And part of the tools, big big selling point and flexibility is it works across all of the different versions. And we've used it, as Geran mentioned, on the general data translation and transformation. We've helped companies ingest MISMO and load it into their proprietary data structure, vice versa. We've used it. It does have modules that create some of the standard forms, including the LE and the CD. But it was a tool that really had a purpose. Originally out of TRID, we've leveraged it for most of all of the different standard data sets in UMDP, PDD, the new government servicing standard. We're also working on some things in the farm lending space with it as well. But it served its purpose. We've had a number of very successful companies use it and still use it, but it wasn't necessarily what we wanted longer term. And so about a year ago, actually, we sat down and started thinking about what would Transformex 2.0 look like? What are some of the things that it can do in the next release that really take it from being what I would consider an industry-leading translation utility for MISMO to something broader than that? And so Geran's team's been working on that a lot. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about what the next version does, and I'll jump in if needed, but just tell us about it.
Yeah, so the current version, it's pretty basic. Well, it's not basic, it's complex, but it's simple in concept, where we take your native data and whatever format it's in and convert it into a MISMO compliant data set. That can be a UCD, it can be an ERLA, it can be a customized output in a MISMO version 3.4 or 6 or whatever it wants to be. And in the first version, we work with our customers to then do the mapping, and we basically lock it, because once it's locked, it's done until the specification changes, and specification changes are 18 months to 24 months, depending on what we're talking about. But we sort of controlled the mapping and the rules. We've gotten some feedback, and then based on what we've seen in the industry, the 2.0 is going to introduce a workbench where systems analysts, business analysts can go in and do the mapping themselves. We still will offer the full white glove service, where we'll come in and do the whole thing soup to nuts for you if you want. But if you have skilled MISMO people that want to use it, they have a workbench that allows them to do the mapping themselves, allows them to put in translation logic in plain English. You don't have to be a coder. You can just put English in there. And that means I have my valid values in my database are, say, enumerated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to transfer them to a type field in MISMO. You can just put that basic logic in there, and it will create the code behind the scenes to do that. It also will come with bundles. And that's a new term for us, is a bundle is a UCD file or is a PDD file. Or, as we're happy to announce, we're going to have the mortgage disclosure data set, MCD, will be in there. So if you get Transformex, you're going to have these bundles already built for you. That is the output. Now you do the mapping of your data in, you hit the button, you have a properly formed MISMO file. We're talking doing it in days instead of weeks and months and years. Part of what we did in the adoption phase with our customers is we get to see how long these things takes and how many years and millions of dollars it takes to build these files. We're talking about doing it in hours. So there is a definite time saving, there's definite cost savings, and if you have the resources that know the MISMO, they'll be able to use it very easily. If you don't, that's where we're here to jump in and help on that. So also, one of the things that comes along with it is maintenance. We're very close with MISMO. We know when changes are coming. We know when Freddie and Fannie publish an updated UCD 2.0. We're involved. We work with our customers, and included in that is the upkeep and making sure you're going to be compliant by the due date of the next version. That is included as part of the software package. That frees your people up to be able to focus on MISMO as the model and let us focus on the back end mechanics and how it works and making sure you stay compliant from all timelines. But yeah, so the biggest change is we're going to give our customers the ability to do the mapping themselves. The bundles come included. And another good thing is, say you're going to interface with a new customer or new client or B2B interface that has their own specification, and that specification is, say, in MISMO 3.6. As Matt mentioned, TransformX has the full set of model in it. So all we need is your input. Your input comes from your database. We will figure out, is it a 3.0 file for ULDD? Is it a 3.3.1 for PDD? Is it a 3.3 for UCD? We'll take care of all that for you, so you don't have to worry about jumping versions. So all that's taken care of in the system.
Yeah, Geran, those are all key things. And to be fair, I mean, you and I had arguments that may be strong, but debates in terms of why it took so long to get the mapping done, or why weren't we giving the mapping away for free,
right?
Knowing that we make the money on the translations. But either way, we got there. The other thing, there's a couple other features that are really cool. I'm not sure if they're in 2.0 or 2.0.1, but we'll have the ability to interface with other technologies, say, for example, a forms or a doc generator. So, those are simple plugins that we can plug into via APIs. I do believe in the initial version, there's things like you can create formulas or, quick calculators that do things like calculate an APR, for example, as long as the data are present in the system. So cool stuff like that. And again, it was, a long time coming, I think, but we're where we need to be on it. And so, there's other tools in the market, bigger ones like MuleSoft that'll do similar stuff, but this one's really trained for the mortgage industry. And not that it won't translate other data sets, it sure will. But I think, for this audience, the MISMO component is the key piece. And so, Brian, just, from your perspective, how do tools like this help the members, and what would you say they should think about in terms of that?
Yeah, so I'll start by kind of defining membership across two different, cohorts, right? You've got your lenders, your mortgage companies, your financial institutions, the mortgage divisions of, right? Some of which may, be in a position to build or manage some of their own kind of tech stack, if you will, including data management. And then you've got the non-lenders who support our industry through building product. And I think especially today, we're seeing so many, newcos come into the mortgage industry with point solutions, leveraging AI in some capacity. And I would encourage those type of companies for sure to be paying attention to this, to what we're talking about, this topic, and evaluating your software for them to leverage, to, as they build product out. I think to me it's an accelerator from a tech, product building perspective. I can't imagine anybody coming into this industry today building product and not, leveraging the MISMO standards. It just seems very foolish to do that. And the good news is, just about everybody that we see, a lot of the new companies that are coming into MISMO are literally new to our industry, and they were smart enough, their research led them to MISMO, and so they should definitely be connecting with Actualize and leveraging not just your experience, but the product and technology you built. But from a lending perspective, as I mentioned earlier, I think, if I were back in the origination space, and let's just say I was in the C-suite of an IMB, when you think about franchise value, like enterprise value, most mortgage companies have very little enterprise value. The value's in the loans they originate, and frankly, they're in tomorrow's loans that they originate, not yesterday's loans, right? And so as I think about creating enterprise value at an IMB level, really a lot of it's going to come around the data, the data that you've aggregated and accumulated over years, sometimes longer, and how you can really be smart about leveraging it in a way that creates future enterprise value. And again, I think we're in a day and age where it's, getting the barrier to entry for smaller companies to leverage and build data models, it's getting easier to do. Not easier, except for the fact that you all, folks like yourself, exist. That's what makes it easier. There's a lot more accessibility, and so I think if I'm thinking about creating true enterprise value for a mid-size IMB, to me it's all about the data and having a sound data foundation, data model, and then again leveraging these industry standards and specs that, to your point, will always be updated if you're leveraging the software that you all have built out.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I couldn't agree more on those comments, and as you remember from earlier in the conversation, Brian mentioned PennyMac. They're a big dog, and so for the companies that maybe are not as big, they've strategically adopted MISMO for a lot of different reasons, mostly for interoperability within their own tech stack, but also outside of that. And so good lessons learned for folks that are thinking about doing some transformation. So I think we're getting to the end of the conversation. I know I had a lot of fun. We dove into some key things that are important in the industry in terms of adoption and barriers to adoption. But I think really what we all want is to get more people involved in MISMO. And so, Brian, if you could just talk briefly about how that works, where people can go, who to contact, so that if they're interested in MISMO, looking at it, becoming a member, they'll know how to do that.
Sure. We make it really simple. MISMO.org. If you from the top nav bar, if you scroll to the far right, there's a drop down for Get Involved. What I've been telling folks to do is when you click that Get Involved, you'll see several options, but there's a work group, hyperlink. If you go to that work group, you'll see that today I think there's 30 active work groups across the MISMO community. I'd pick, depending on where you sit in the loan manufacturing process as a professional, there's definitely a work group for you. Whether or not you think you have anything to offer the work group, I would join and be in there, because just listening and being in the room, both physically and virtually, but just listening and being in the room, you're going to hear conversations, you're going to get insights into what's coming down the pipe. And, again, I put myself back in my lender shoes. I would have had people across my organization in every work group, just listening for what's coming in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months that I need to be aware of, and how do I plan today? It's a strategic benefit to be in those rooms, to know what's, Stan Middleman talks about seeing around corners. MISMO is a place where it helps you see around corners. And then I think what happens, and you guys see this as well, you may join a group just to listen and learn, but at some point you start to contribute, right? And you start to be part of these solutions. And there's a lot of value in that, for organizations to be driving, being part of the drive to innovate for our industry. So that's one way to do it. And by the way, MISMO, we are a standards body. We're the industry's nonprofit. And so you don't have to be a member to do what I just described. You can literally show up in the room and, as a non-member. We believe you'll get a lot more benefit if you're a member. It'll unlock access to, a lot of the data and specs and historical, I guess minutes or notes from meetings in the past. And there's a lot of value there. We host 3 events every year, 3 summits. Our summits are unique in that, for the most part, the summit is about those work groups, where those communities come together in person, in real life, and spend meaningful time, 3 hours in their work group. But then there's countless hours in the hallway and in the lobby bar and for coffee in the morning where, again, the work continues. And so there's just plenty of opportunities. I think any young professional in our industry should be part of MISMO just to learn and absorb and understand the entire loan manufacturing process from a different aspect.
All right.
Yeah, I'll
There
jump
you
in.
go.
One thing real quick. One thing about the meetings and the summits and all that is that we're all volunteers. We're here and we're all supporting the same thing. So your title may be something in your company, but you're just a peer here. Everybody's welcoming, no matter if you're a tech person, a business person, somewhere in the middle. It's an incredibly welcoming group because we're all pulling in the same direction for the same thing. It's not for, yeah, it may help our company or whatever, but we're doing this on our own time to volunteer to help move the mortgage industry forward. So it's really, really welcoming group.
Yeah, and I'd say too, you get what you put into it. You get out of it what you put into it. And so smart companies are doing just what Brian said he would have done when he was in the lending space. They're putting a lot of people into the work groups. They're moving their strategic agendas along. But again, they're not buying anything. It's really just collaboration.
Yeah.
And you get out of it what you put in. So how do you get in touch with us at Actualize? Pretty straightforward. www.actualizeconsulting.com. You can get to Geran and I through LinkedIn or through our contact information. But again, I think we talked a lot today about these challenges with MISMO. The more people that can get involved, the better it'll be and continue to be. And MISMO is expanding a lot. So folks that think that it's just about GSEs or that type of loan product, it is the entire ecosystem. It is comprehensive and it's broadening, even into different types of lending vehicles. So with that said, we want to thank everyone for listening today. And that's a wrap.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Actualizing Success. Make sure to visit us online at www.actualizeconsulting.com, where you can explore our service offerings. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or your preferred platform. If you've enjoyed what we talked about today, please consider leaving a review and following us on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or would like to share your opinions with us, please send us a note at podcast@actualizeconsulting.com. We look forward to hearing from you.